Welcome, listeners, to the latest episode of the AdQuick Advertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology, culture, marketing, all of the things that you guys care about. Today, we have Sean Byrnes. He is a startup founder and entrepreneur. He is a blogger. He is an executive coach, and he's also a podcaster. Sean is one of the more accomplished people in Silicon Valley. He sold a company to Yahoo. He's seen the trenches of startup life and everything in between. And I'm so excited to have him here as a guest. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to have to live up to that promise, and I don't know if I can, but I'll do my best.
Sean. Just your presence lives up to it. I remember years ago seeing you in Silicon Valley in the heart, pre-pandemic, just having a good time with startup life. And I think you've always brought with you that sort of positive attitude, just a real heart for work, for life. And every time we've hung out, I've enjoyed the time a lot.
Thanks, man. Wow, you're building me up here. I need to live up to this. This is going to be like that biopic where the trailer is really amazing and the movie really needs to bring it. So I'll do my best.
I heard Michael Lewis is looking for a job for his next project.
Oh my God.
I don't know. My problem is I'm well known for telling bad jokes. I think I'll get shut down pretty early in development.
So we'll dive in then to not at all a difficult topic of this economic cycle. And so for me, at least, this has felt different in a number of ways. The Fed acting different technology. I'm curious, so from your perspective, as someone who talks to a lot of startup founders, how are people currently adjusting to what's happening? How do you see this macroeconomic landscape playing out for new founders, or I guess for founders that are a little bit along in their career? I'm curious your thoughts and sort of a temperature check from you.
Yeah, so starting off, I've invested in a few hundred companies and advised many more. I'm also an LP in a lot of venture funds. And so I've seen the market from both sides, both the investors that are looking to invest in the market and also the companies looking to raise capital. And I'll tell you, there's a few things that are interesting. One is I'm old enough that I've been now through 2-3 major economic cycles: the dot-com bubble bursting, the financial crisis, the pandemic, and you can consider this part of the pandemic cycle. And for me, I think I realized very quickly that a lot of people in the market right now, since we had such a long bull market, have not been through economic cycles. It's maybe their first one. And so on both sides, both investors and founders, there's a whole generation of people who this is the first economic cycle they've seen. And because the bull market lasted so long, a lot of the lessons that you used to learn very quickly, because economic cycles would happen more quickly, they haven't learned them yet. And they're learning them the very hard way right now. So I'll give you a few examples. So startup founders who were not used to the old ways of raising capital before the boom times happened, there's a bunch of skills around long-term management of your cap table, about long-term management of your growth rate and your burn rate, things that didn't matter for quite a long time, 4 or 5 years, that in reality were all that ever mattered, have come back. And a lot of these founders haven't learned those lessons. I've spent a lot of time in the last few months coaching founders on how to actually build long-term fundraising and capital strategies, how to actually think about your financial model as a tool, not just as a byproduct of your reporting. On the flip side, with investors, a lot of investors aren't used to a world where LPs have other options. Interest rates were so low for so long, LPs were looking for alpha anywhere. Now, with interest rates higher, it turns out you have to compete for LP dollars. And nobody is prepared for that. Most of the investors that I know who have raised funds or their investing career has existed for the last 4 or 5 years, they're not used to what it takes to win an LP dollar and why they would choose you versus the other options that they have. And as a result, you're going to see a lot of funds that are struggling in the same way those startups are struggling as they try to learn these skills that they haven't learned before. And they don't have a lot of time to learn them. And that's the problem. Some of these things take a few tries to get right. And these companies and these funds don't have that kind of time. They have to really lean into it and hope they can figure out a formula that works. The good news is coming out of all of this generation will have learned these lessons and be better prepared for the next economic cycle. But I think that there's still a lot of pain over the next 6 to 9 months as these things shake out.
Yeah, I think so too. And along with that, something that's different, at least to me, feels different, is that, and I guess the first part of this is a question, and the second part I'll share why is, has a lot of the standard railroad for tech been built? And when I say that, I mean we used to. We're old, we're old. We've been using technology products online since the 90s. It seemed like for a while, every 10 years, we would be using a different set of software tools. And 10 years ago, we're still using a lot of the same tools now. So, like, from a startup perspective, like, are we all in denial that there's going to be like the full churn of everything? Are there always going to be opportunities because of how big tech acts and the David versus Goliath mindset? I'm curious how you view maybe not the financials, but the actual ideas of startups.
Well, I think the thing about the technology industry that's so amazing that we don't realize is how young it is. And when we say tech, we typically mean software, although it didn't always mean software. For a long time, it meant hardware too. And partly why we think of tech as software now is hardware is much more mature now, right? In the early days of semiconductors, things were changing really fast. These days in semiconductors, things aren't changing that fast. Even NVIDIA is making a lot of money off GPUs, but we've had GPUs for a long time, right? We see new technology, but we're reassembling pieces we have in new ways. Software, however, is much younger than hardware in terms of the internet products that we know. And so when we talk about tech now, we talk about software because it's what's changing most frequently because it's so young. Is it maturing? I think that there is a point where software will mature, but that has not happened yet. And it hasn't happened, and you can tell it because it's still possible for new products to win in the market. And so you're right. Do we use some of the products that we used to? I still use Gmail, so I guess technically that's the case. But of the other tools that I use, most of them didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. Everything from Notion, Slack was around, but it was very new. Most of the tools, even VS Code in the current incarnation for Microsoft, if you're programming, is fairly new development. So I think that there's still opportunity for new products to win, but there are also challenges you can challenge the status quo. I think a lot of the LLMs have a lot of hype, and I'm not sure how many products will succeed of the current LLM, cohort. But what I can tell you is they have shown people there's a different way to use software. We can now chat with software. And the fact that we're still uncovering such fundamentals, it makes me really optimistic. I think that we still have another decade at least, if not two, before software starts maturing as hardware has, and the rate of innovation starts to slow down. I am, however, biased. 20 years ago, I went to grad school for AI. And back then, I will tell you, we used to joke that the things we were studying in university around AI were never going to be useful in our lifetimes. It was our children's children that were going to finally make use of these great things we were developing. And here we are 20 years later, I look like a genius for going to grad school for AI. And I was totally wrong about the timelines of it. And so I'm a little bit biased because I feel like the moment that I started out in that journey 20 years ago is finally arriving a lot earlier than I thought. So that boosts my optimism. But it also means that I know how much potential there is in AI because we studied it for so long. We've only just started to tap into what it can do. And I've left you guys speechless. It's amazing. Being such a profound thinker, I get this a lot.
Well, we're getting that alert from the government right now. Somehow I turned my phone off and we're still getting it, Adam. Sorry. You're on mute.
The G-men are finding a way through.
I don't know.
We can do it. We have the technology.
Anyway, so let's get back to the conversation. So you said, it's still possible to build new software products, but one thing that we're seeing is that, the hardware manufacturers ultimately become gatekeepers of their own ecosystems. And so with that said, do you think, you had a great success and scaled Flurry up to, hundreds of millions of devices, hundreds of thousands of developers on the platform before you sold it off to
millions of devices, billions of devices, millions of developers. I could tell you stories. It was crazy times.
Yeah. So does that world still exist, or is everybody going to have to play by the rules of the walled off ecosystems? What's your take?
So I think the reality is software, the internet in particular, but most business has always been a distribution game. And I think anyone who if you start a company for the first time, a lot most of us think it's about the product, it's about the business, it's about the books we've read. And after that, every repeat founder, second time, third time, fourth time, they know it's about distribution. That's all that matters. Can you reach customers at scale, cost effectively? If you can, your product just needs to be good enough. It doesn't need to be the best product. And if you can, it doesn't matter how good your product is. And that's been true forever. I mean, largely that was the rise of the early internet portals like Yahoo. It was a distribution game. The rise of Google search was a distribution game. Everything's a distribution game. So the fact that some of the hardware providers and platforms have distribution, you have to go through them, is not new. I mean, Mark Pincus gave a great interview before he started Zynga, and which would roll out, got to start with early Facebook apps. He was thinking about buying a large news site. I think it was CNET, because he knew if he had an audience, he could build a business by selling things to them. It just turns out Facebook launched their app platform and he realized that was a bigger audience. Let me just go pursue that with Zynga. So generally speaking, people have done this. We know distribution matters. It is also not new that distribution is controlled by people who already have audiences. And that isn't, by the way, just Apple and Google and Amazon. These days, it's influencers, people who have millions, tens of millions, 100 millions of followers. There's a reason why Mr. Beast can keep running out so many different products, is because he has an audience. He has distribution. So if you're a new person with a new product, often the first coaching I give them is not about how to improve their product. It's about how do you get that audience? How do you find distribution? And it's one of the largest and hardest problems to solve. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, most companies that I know that fail don't fail because their product is horrible. Most of them fail because they can't figure out that distribution problem. You know, let's say the three of us wanted to build a new product. We could probably figure out how to get in front of 10 people. We know 10 people in our neighborhood. Maybe we can get in front of 100 people. We tapped everybody we know. I mean, you know, Adam has a huge online following. Maybe we get to thousands. The question is that distribution? Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not. If we wanted to build a consumer app these days, people really aren't going to take us seriously. We have millions of people on it. I don't know how to reach millions of people, man. It's one of the great problems of our time. So I agree with you that distribution is difficult. I agree with you there's gatekeepers, but I don't see it being any different than the game has ever been. What I do think is different in the distribution game is there's more people competing for that attention. So what's changed is not the distribution game, it's not the gatekeepers, it's the attention game. There are more things that are competing for my attention than ever before, regardless of how you reach me. So how do you make sure you stand out in that attention game, and how do you win the attention game? In fact, actually in the Breaking Point, my newsletter, I just posted an update yesterday. The latest post is about that. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that success is an attention game. They think it's something else.
And we see examples of what you just said, Sean, at the smaller scale, not even just Mr. Beast, but companies like HubSpot buying out, B2B newsletters so they could reach, their new audiences in a consistent way that they would definitely open. They bought The Hustle, I think, of one of many media properties that they've purchased. We're all internet native marketers, and so we're bought into this. It's not something we need to be sold on. But Sean, with everything you just said, why do you think it is there is still sort of an archetypal Silicon Valley founder who's like anti-marketing, who's like, everything has to be organic. I don't want to do marketing. Why do you think we get those types with everything, even with Steve Jobs, who was a fantastic marketer? It seems like there's like this type of person who thinks marketing is a dirty word, and how do we move them past that?
And actually, Adam, you and I, we complained about this in the past. I think there's a lot of people that have tried to conflate marketing and advertising. And I do think that internet made marketing really efficient. And by that, what I mean is it made advertising really efficient. And so you have a generation of people who think they know what marketing is, and really what they know is what advertising is and how to do advertising. So they know the tactics, they know how to launch social campaigns, they know how to run ads. They don't understand the fundamentals of marketing strategy. You start whipping out things like ideal customer profiles and positioning and messaging strategies, and they really aren't sure what you mean. They think by messaging strategy, you mean the text in your ads. They think by positioning, they mean like, am I higher in the search rankings than my competitors? And it's actually quite a shame, because in my opinion, marketing is the most fundamental skill you need to be successful. Because marketing to me is, do you understand the market? Do you understand your buyer? Do you understand how they think? and how you can cut through the noise to connect with them. And if you can do that, then advertising becomes something you can do effectively. But a lot of times I feel like, it's random acts of marketing. People are just going out there running campaigns, hoping it works. They're using the math to try to analyze the performance to improve the numbers. But what's missing underlying is the actual strategy that makes these things work. And I think that's actually what you see is people pushing back on marketing because they've seen it not work, because they've seen advertising without a strategy doesn't really work. And I can't even tell you how many companies, because to your point, some of the people who complain about marketing the most are the best at it, because it's a very narrow definition of marketing to refer to advertising in particular. Tesla is a great example. Elon loves talking about how they don't spend money on marketing, but they do. They shot a car into space. They don't spend money on advertising, but they do marketing all the time because they actually understand marketing strategy and the fact that it's about how do you get someone's attention, not can you pay $1 and make $1.01 off of it. So I could go on this for hours, but I think anybody who's young in their career and wants to work in marketing and become an executive someday, the most important thing you can do is actually learn marketing strategic fundamentals about identifying ideal customers, building positioning, building messaging, and then all the tactics that everybody thinks is marketing, those fall out of those things. They become much easier if you're good at the strategy. But if you're not good at the strategy, it turns out maybe you get lucky. Maybe your campaigns work, maybe they don't. But you know what? It's a form of gambling, in my opinion, because you really won't know.
Yeah, we recently had John Stringer on, who's the president of Tesla Owners of Silicon Valley. And, going back to what you were saying about how Tesla doesn't advertise, but they are in the marketing game. They've spent years cultivating, building out this community with John's help. And he was kind of chatting about that last time we had them on the pod. And do you have any, community? Obviously, you've built communities around the developer ecosystem and mobile over your career. Do you have any pointers that you'd like to give our audience on, because most of our audience is, I would say it skews towards people who are building versus people who are in their ivory towers and spending millions of dollars. But do you have any insights that you could share about building communities and finding those ICPs and finding those target clients, building relationships?
I'll give you I think there's a lot of things about marketing strategy that are non-intuitive that if you think about it really hard, make a lot of sense. I'll give you a few examples. People think about marketing and standing out in the market is what you say, like the content of what you're saying. And often actually it's how you say it. So in the early, my last company is a company called Outlier AI. We used AI to mine large data sets for consumer brands to find insights automatically. But early on, before we even had a product, I was curious about this question. How do you get distribution? How do you reach the people? Because our customers were CMOs of large brands like Nike and Capital One and Macy's. How do you get their attention? How do you even reach them in the first place? And so we experimented. I had a theory that a lot of tools in the general data space, the voice they use to talk to their potential customers was very condescending. It was a bit like a professor teaching a class, telling you, listen, you're too stupid to know what's going on in your business. You should buy my product, and that's the only way to figure it out. And the theory was, what if we change the voice? What if the voice of our company was more like your best friend helping you with your homework? Like, listen, you're smart, you got this, you just need a little bit of help and you can ace this. And so we tried that. We started a newsletter called the Data Driven Daily. It was just a daily newsletter with tips on how to use data to make decisions. And really, there was nothing novel in the newsletter. It wasn't like I invented anything in there. It was the voice that was very different. And it turned out that just took off. It became probably the most successful newsletter I've ever been associated with. And interesting, what we found was then some of our initial customers came to us. In fact, one of our first customers of Outlier ever was Zillow. And the Zillow team came and said, listen, we love the newsletter. We don't even know what your product does. We just want to try it. Because that voice that we were using had connected with them in a way that all the other vendors had failed to do. So sometimes marketing strategy is the voice that you use, but you can only figure that out if you understand your customer. You understand what else they're hearing, how they think, how they're looking into these sorts of things. I'll give you a second example, which is one of the things that I think is pretty profoundly true is most people spend a lot of time on marketing to compensate for bad product experiences. So they're like, listen, we'll just dump a bunch of money into marketing, and then our product, which is either not memorable or not super differentiated, will stand out. And I think largely the way to think about marketing is you're opening the door and inviting them in. But the reason they'll come in is because the product really impresses them. It shows them something novel. So a lot of these builders, we spend a lot of time building products. We fall in love with the product mostly because of how hard we know it is to build. So let's say we're building a new AI product. It's hard to build AI products. It's like really difficult. And so we get really excited about the cool features it has. What we don't see is the fact that it takes 5 minutes, 20 minutes, hours, days for that payoff to happen of using it. Whereas that person that are in, the marketing has opened the door. We then have an opportunity to show them something they've never seen before, something novel, something interesting. But we often don't use it because we get stuck on all the things everybody else has. Like, hey, look at our login screen. Everybody has a login screen. Hey, this is how easy it is to connect to data. Everybody can connect to data. Hey, look, we have this AI chat feature. Everybody's an AI chat feature. Like, you imagine if I'm going to spend all this marketing strategy to open that door, I need the product to grab that person and not let them go. And you do that by showing them something they haven't seen before. You don't go do that by showing a laundry list of stuff that's just check boxes. So in that case, your marketing strategy is how do we position the customer right so what they see will be that hook that they'll remember, that one thing that makes us so different. Then all of a sudden you realize marketing isn't about selling the whole product. It's not even about selling the whole value proposition. Marketing is about getting somebody right there so we can actually make sure our product can grab them and hold on to them. And so people complain a lot about these marketing campaigns that don't talk about what the product actually does. But I actually think if you look at them, a lot of cases, that's because the people doing them know what they're doing. Like, I'm not going to tell you about my product. I'm going to get you into a specific mode of thinking. So when you see my product, you're ready for it. And that's just two examples of the kind of things that fundamentals of marketing would tell you that are not intuitive and they don't follow the, the growth hacker mindset of numeric optimization campaigns.
Yeah, Sean, I loved what you said, especially about the fact that you don't have to be flogging your product on social media or in email campaigns or even, definitely not at events where you want to add value, but, you want to be demonstrating to the market that you understand the user, that you understand the problems, that you understand the sector really well. And ultimately, when you do that, in addition to talking about the features and benefits of the product, you're going to have people take you really seriously and then be like, hey, this guy really cares. They get my industry, they get my company, they get my challenges. And they'll be much more likely to raise their hand and come sit through a product demo than if you send them, 10 LinkedIn spam messages begging with them to come check something out. So I think that, that sort of effort is, I don't even think it's harder. It's just different than the, just the growth hacking mindset where it's all just spreadsheets and numbers. And we're writing a post about this now about balancing sort of Moneyball and creativity in marketing and why you sort of have to do both. I think especially for B2B sales or complex sales cycles, if you're not selling a funny t-shirt, the funny t-shirt with just the ad creative, you can probably convert on those. But if you're selling, if you're selling and you're a manufacturer of like parts for a nuclear submarine, you might need to build some trust first. That's just an example.
That's true. I think that you're absolutely right about this. And I think it's just one of those things where I almost wish everyone would start their career trying to launch a new consumer product. Because that's how I started my career. I tried to launch new consumer products. I don't think I was hugely successful at it. But it's one thing, like if you have a sales process and you can sit down and talk to prospects, there's this illusion and this temptation that you can make up for all the deficiencies in your marketing and your product just by how charismatic or how good your sales pitch is. The great thing about consumer products is they're almost impossible to make work, but you learn very quickly about how hard that is because you don't have the luxury of sitting down with a person looking at your mobile app and thinking about, should I download it or not? You can't sit there and be like, download it, it's great, trust me. And so you learn this lesson very clearly that most things don't stand out and most things are easily forgotten. So again, I don't recommend most people work in consumer. It's a very unforgiving, difficult market. I can't believe I found any form of success there, mostly because I couldn't explain to you how I found success. But I'll tell you, it's great training to learn these lessons. Because if you're working at big enterprises in a marketing department, you're so disconnected from the actual challenges of the market that you may not be learning the things you think you're learning.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit, Sean. You've done a lot of work building teams, and I'm curious, what are you saying to founders now? Not even from a remote world perspective, although that could be true too, but maybe just broadly from a hiring perspective in a sort of landscape where it's a little weird right now, right? It's like sort of the really good people might be entrenched in their roles, and now you might have like thousands of new people wanting to join in for PM or Eng or marketing. Say I'm a young founder and I want to start hiring again. Is there any sort of best practices you're thinking through here? Should these companies be doing more marketing to get inbound hires? Should they, sort of scour themselves on social media and recruit people? Is it kind of a mix? Sorry, it's kind of a broad question, but I'm just curious how you're thinking about
No,
hiring.
I think this is a definitive question. Until AI takes over, companies are made of people, and the quality of people that you have is the quality of the company that you have. And so a lot of these things are, and we do have a moment where if you were in the tech industry between 2019 and 2022, it was very hard to hire good people just because the big tech companies were sucking up so much of the population. There was so much money flowing to so many places. Now it's a different story. It's very possible to hire great people. Many of them are looking for work after all the layoffs and the cutbacks and the company failures. And that probably looks like it will continue, to be honest with you, for the foreseeable future. So most of my advice to founders is basically I spend a lot of time trying to explain to them that they don't know how to hire people. And the problem ends up being there's this weird mental contagion out there, which is most companies are horrible at hiring and they have horrible interviewing processes, but it's the only thing most people have known. And so you go to your first job, you go through that interview, it was horrible, but it's all you know. You go to your next company, you go through that interview, it's all you know. So you start your own company. What interview process do you use? The only one you've ever known, which by the way is horrible. And so it's almost like a contagion where people are inheriting these horrible interview processes, these horrible recruiting experiences. And what they don't realize is it's filtering out the best people because they don't want to be miserable. They don't want to go through those sorts of processes. So a lot of what I do is help deprogram founders to think about their recruiting process, interview process from scratch. Let's throw away all the things you think you know. Let's throw away the things you think you've gotten good at because those are the wrong things. How are you going to attract the best people? How are you going to identify the best people, right? Are you just relying on the fact that their resume says they were great, or is there a way in the interview you can decide if there's great, right? Here's a basic example. Most people's job is not to sit around answering questions all day, but most interviews are you sit down and ask them questions all day. And that doesn't make a lot of sense in the end. If you think about it, if you were to design an interview process from scratch today, what would you probably do? You'd probably ask them to do the job. It'd be like an apprenticeship. You'd say, do the work. Let's see how you do. And if you do it well, I'd hire you into my team. Obviously, it might be impractical to have them do the job, but there's great forms of work simulations. On the Breaking Point, my newsletter, free pitch, I posted about how I used to do it, which is designing a very lightweight work simulation. Most companies bring you in for 4 hours and sit you down for 4 hours and ask you questions for 4 hours. What if you took those 4 hours and use them very differently? You're not going to ask for more time from the candidate. That would be unfair and frankly discriminatory. You're going to take those same 4 hours you were going to use for Q&A and let's make it as if they're at the company, right? Let's have meetings. Let's have one-on-one discussions. Let's talk about real problems that they would face in the role. I don't really care about where they went to school and what their last job title said they did. I'm curious about how they would do the job that I'm asking them to do. Because if you're not careful, what ends up happening is you only hire people that will do these jobs the way that you do these jobs. And that doesn't sound like a very optimal strategy. I want to get the best person that might do the job in a way that I might not do the job. It wouldn't even occur to me to do the job. I think some companies have taken it too far where now they want to try before they buy. So they want to give you these day-long, multi-day projects, see how you do. It's kind of you're trying out, like you're trying out for a sports team. That's bad too. That's discriminatory. The only people that can afford to do that are people who already have enough money that they can afford to do free work. Those are not necessarily the best people. So you have to be really critical in thinking about how you design that process if you want the best people to come in. I will tell you 9 out of 10 companies, their interview process actually filters out the best people. It doesn't identify the best people. It actively filters them out. And there are a few companies out there to do it well. And one thing I'll tell you is once somebody has seen a process that really works well, that is very respectful to the candidate, really identifies great people, their eyes open. It's like you pull back the curtain on them. And the metric that I use for success is how many people that you interview that you turn down, you do not hire for the role, recommend other people in their network for roles at your company. Because it turns out if you do recruiting well, if your interview process is actually well designed and respectful and productive, that will happen. And at all of my companies, I'm happy to say that that's happened. And we've hired people that were referred by people that interviewed with our companies and we did not make them an offer. Now that sounds crazy. It's like, well, who would do that? Who would recommend their friends to a company that didn't even give them an offer? And that's the standard though. And once you really pull it back and tear up, the foundation and really rethink what recruiting looks like, you start to realize that these are things that should be normal. We should expect them. It shouldn't be a miserable process.
That's fantastic. Fantastic advice, Sean. And I'm so glad that it took about 15 years for those. How many manhole covers are there in New York City, or how many pennies can you fit into a taxi? I'm glad that those interview questions are all gone because, again, it's not a good use of your time. But let me kind of follow up with another question. How have you kind of reimagined, team building or hiring, given that, some of us work in hybrid scenarios, some work in remote first, some are back in the office. How have you triaged that with the folks that you advise?
So I should start off my last company, Outlier. We started in 2015 and we were hybrid from day one. So the two founders, myself and my co-founder, Mike Kim, we were local, we could meet in person. But our first employee we hired, Anthony Watkins, he lives in Virginia. So out of the gate, we were hybrid as a company. I have often thought about this as I think it's a very false dichotomy, remote versus in person, hybrid. The reality is, again, companies are made of people. And so the kind of people that you have determines the kind of structure that works well for you. So Outlier, for example, was primarily people whom we look for people who are parents, right, who are later in their career, not because we thought they were the best people for the job, but because we wanted people who were flexible, who were creative. And a lot of those people felt overlooked by the larger technology industry, who were looking for the young college grads, the people who had no specific, life constraints. And we were like, just because you just had kids doesn't mean you're any less good at your job. Let's give you a chance to really be innovative and get the cutting edge. But as a result, if you have a bunch of parents, it turns out they're very good at time management. And so being in the office isn't necessary because you don't need to give them external time management structure. They are perfectly good at motivating and managing themselves because they have to be. And so in that world, being remote, being hybrid is fine. If you hire a whole lot of people straight out of college who don't have time management skills, maybe you do have to have them in the office and teach them those skills. Maybe that is what's necessary to give them that underpinning, that foundation. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you have a way in your interview process to select for the people that work in the way you want. I work with founders who want everybody in the office and they want to make sure they do nothing but work and they focus and the company is their life. And you know what they do? They hire people that want to do that. And I have other companies I work with that are fully remote and very supportive of work-life balance, and they hire people where that's important to them. So I think all of these debates are very silly. It ends up being people's personal preference. What really matters is who you hire, and companies are made of people. And so hire the people that will make up the company the way that you think you want to run it, and you'll be fine.
So Sean, another question I had for you, because you talk to a lot of founders and young executives, are there any interesting patterns that you've seen in the new generation of founder that's, I guess, not even maybe different, but things you could point out maybe amongst the new set?
One that I'll tell you is a very bad habit is a lot of the newer generation think that there is a correct answer. They think there's a correct answer to in-person versus remote, or there's a right way to run the company, or there's a right way to do fundraising. I worry some of it is the Y Combinator of the whole industry, where everybody believes that there's a right answer, that if I follow this magical playbook, everything will work out. If you go back like 20 years, there wasn't that feeling because nobody had any idea what they were doing. Like, it was generally accepted that nobody knew what they were doing. And so we didn't even have a pretense of a playbook. It was really like, let's figure this out. I think the problem ends up being, you've seen the lean startup methodology, the Y Combinator, demo day pitch process. What's happened is a lot of people now think there's a right answer and they want you to give them the answer. They're like, okay, cool. Time for fundraising. How do I fundraise? Or great, I need to get into this market. What do I do? Just give me the process. I'll just follow that process and I'll be successful. And as a result, there's also a lot less tolerance for when it doesn't go well, right? So you think you have a process, you think this is how I do it. And when that doesn't go well, what do? What's your fallback? Like, how do you have that robustness? I mean, the reality is, I'm a case in point. Like, let's be honest, right? I've never really faced adversity in my life. Not really. Like, I had to work hard in school and my parents had to sacrifice a lot for me to go to college. And it doesn't mean that, life was easy, but that's not the same as really facing adversity. And so if you have someone who's done well in school and gone to a good college and gotten a good job, have they ever really faced adversity? And so what do they do when they try to start a company and things don't go well? And that is the first time they've ever faced adversity, really. What do? How do they deal with it? They have no coping mechanisms. They haven't developed them over time. They haven't ever had to do that before. I'm not saying they can't, right? You can figure it out. It's very difficult if you believe there should be an answer, because then what happens is you start looking for the answer instead of doubling down and saying, okay, there's no way to know the answer. I just have to be gritty and resourceful and try stuff and experiment. If you think there's an answer, you spend all your effort trying to find the answer. You don't fall back on that experimentation, that iteration, the exploration. You don't go back to a beginner's mindset and try to learn. You just try to force it to work. And for a while, it was okay because it was so easy to raise VC money. These companies could force it. You could raise money and you can use that money to force it to work. And now that you can't do that anymore, a lot of those skills are missing. And so I think that's unfortunate. I don't know that it was entirely their fault. I think there's a lot of quote unquote thought leaders that pontificate about, oh, we have the answers. This is how you do it. And I think a lot of that thought leadership has become so pervasive that these people grow up reading these blog posts and reading these books. And again, they think there's an answer, and there isn't. It's all a lie. It's just like all these sites that promise, hey, you can become a millionaire in real estate. Just sign up so I can teach you my process. By the way, if you're listening, those are all scams. The way they make money is by charging you for their process, which does not work. It's the same thing in startup methodologies. People don't realize they're not paying for it, but they are. These thought leaders want you to. Like, I'll give you a great example. Nobody thought it was a good idea to move to Miami as a startup founder. Like, honestly, it's objectively a bad idea. I'm not saying I like Miami, by the way. I like going to Miami, but it was never going to become a hotbed of startups. It was just never going to happen. But it was a manifestation of there were certain people who were thought of as having the answer. And they were like, Miami's the answer. And a bunch of founders were so stuck in this idea that somebody has the answer. Let's move to Miami. Let's go. It's the future. Clearly, somebody has the answer. That's what the answer. Let's go. And I'm not down on Miami. And for a lot of people, it can make sense to live there. But let's be perfectly honest. It's an example of this belief that there is an answer instead of just figuring out for yourself.
I mean, Keith Rabois is still bullish on Miami, and we actually placed the billboards in San Francisco that Mayor Suarez was like, "Hey, have any questions?" So we're kind of in with them, but you're totally right. Going back to the things that were, pontificated many years ago. One of those was like blitzscaling, and as somebody who's a growth professional. That was beat into our heads, and it was basically execute on this one tactic, and here are the results that you could expect. But none of these businesses that were built this way, I'd say an overwhelming majority of them aren't going to survive. They don't have the free cash flow to support continued growth without having to pay the Google or the Facebook tax. Maybe Adam, you could add in a little bit more to that. What's your take on this?
I will tell you, I think unit economics is a lost art that people are having to relearn really fast because they didn't understand it. Here's a quick story. Years ago, there was this great e-commerce war in India between Flipkart and Snapdeal, right? These were these two companies, both of which were trying to become the Amazon in the Indian market. And at one point, SoftBank invested in Snapdeal. It turned out they bet wrong. Flipkart ended up winning. But anyway, they invested a ton of money in Snapdeal. And I talked to one of the early people over at Snapdeal because the amount they invested was gargantuan, but they burned through it so fast. And I couldn't figure out how you spent that much money, because this was the blitzscaling thing. The idea, if you have more money than everybody else and you can invest it to get to scale, then capital becomes your competitive advantage. And so that was what SoftBank did. They gave, I can't remember, I think they gave Snapdeal $3 billion they spent, that they ran out of in less than 2 years. And I was like, how do you spend $3 billion in less than 2 years? I might have the numbers wrong, but it was something like that. And I talked to this person, and he's like, you have to realize that SoftBank made the investment with the requirement we spend it that quickly. That was a term in the investment, that they didn't have the luxury to sit on it. They had to spend it that fast. And then I was like, okay, even then, I tried to do the math. I don't think I could spend $3 billion that fast if you gave it to me. Like, I wouldn't even, like, what do you buy? And this is when, like, it all came out. He was like, okay, Sean, the first thing you do if you have to spend that much money that quickly is you overpay for everything. And I was like, well, that's blitzscaling in a nutshell right there. The idea that capital as a competitive advantage could scale was in some ways a zero interest rate phenomenon. Although if you go back to the dot-com bubble was the same way. I think blitzscaling is a very good idea. It sounds like a good idea if you're in a very hot market that everybody believes is obviously going to happen because you want to win. And so if you look at the early days of the internet or the early days of mobile, I mean, that was Uber's strategy, was blitzscaling. Like, it's like, we know this market's going to happen. We want to win. Let's go. But it's a little bit like the first mover advantage. It sounds really good in textbook, but when you actually in practice trying it out, it doesn't really end up making a lot of sense. And so I do think that, is the kind of thing, it's a kind of idea that doesn't go away. It kind of comes back to haunt us on a regular basis. And so trust me, a few years from now, people will be like, oh, I had this new idea for an approach to growing market. We're going to call it fast scaling. You're like, blitzscaling? Like, yes, that sounds better. Blitzscaling, that's what we'll call it. It's a brand new idea I just thought of just now. And this is the problem with getting older in tech, is like, you're like, I've seen this movie a few times now. I could tell you why you're wrong, but nobody's gonna believe me. Although it's funny because it's not like I'm super young, but I'm not super old. 10 years ago, I was on a panel talking about over-the-hill founders. And I was like, damn, if I'm over the hill 10 years ago, man, I must be getting ready for retirement pretty soon.
Well, all the youth worship in Silicon Valley is kind of misguided when the average startup age founder is something like 42. So even if Silicon Valley bias is younger at like the national level, like it's more normal for a 40-year-old who has, some economic security and some experience to go out and start a company than the, Facebook dropped out of Harvard type story is an outlier. It's like, well, that's not something that's normal.
So the reason that happens, so there actually is data behind it. So if you are, your point, if you're later in your career, you start a company, your chance of success is much higher. But what we mean by success is your chance of selling your company for a positive return is much higher. It turns out if you want the enormous outlier returns, like the $10 billion companies, those are predominantly started by people younger in their career who are willing to take crazy risks that the three of us would not take because it sounds bonkers. And it's essentially buying a lottery ticket. But if enough young people buy enough lottery tickets, somebody's going to win. And that's going to produce the enormous returns that Silicon Valley is built on. So there's a reason why people think that way. I don't agree with it personally. Most of the people I invest in are second-time founders, to be honest with you, because I would prefer to get a positive return on my money, even if it's not billions and billions of dollars. But it comes from somewhere, which is, I'll be honest with you, like, I see a lot of pitches from ideas that I think are crazy, and sometimes they work.
Yeah, I'm of I've read enough investing books now to not be as indoctrinated in the Silicon Valley unicorn thing. And in fact, following that, like unless you're a VC and you have a whole team, you have no edge there anyway. So I'd like to dissuade any person listening from making too many angel bets, maybe with like 5% of your money, but for the most part, be boring, buy index funds, don't try to beat the market, things like that.
Oh,
Sorry,
if you're angel investing is a fancy way of throwing away your money. So if you're going to invest in startup companies and angel, just assume you're throwing your money away and don't invest any more than you'd happily just throw away on a vacation or something else, because you're not going to see a return. The chances that you see a return are so small that, again, it's like buying a lottery ticket. It turns out your odds are actually better to like go to Vegas and play poker, and your odds there aren't even very good. So yeah, do not angel invest for the money. It is not a good way to make money.
And at least in Vegas, you get free drinks. Well, we're coming up on the hour. So before we go, Sean, where can our listeners find you online?
Yes, so please subscribe to my newsletter. I desperately need the subscribers, mostly because I enjoy drawing the cartoons in every issue. So give me an excuse to draw more cartoons. It's breakingpoint.tech. You can also find my podcast called This Startup Help Desk. We answer questions from the audience about how to build companies and deal with startup issues. It's available everywhere your podcasts are found. It's also thestartuphelpdesk.com. So my podcast, my newsletter, that's what I'm here for. I see this next stage of my career as giving back to the community that gave me so much. And so I try to share the lessons that I've learned in the newsletter. I try to answer questions in the podcast. Anything I can do to help people in the way I was helped in my career is what I want to do.
Well, we thank you for the time sharing your ideas with us today. For our listeners, if you look in the video description, we'll drop some links to connect with Sean. And until next week, please like, comment, and subscribe. We will speak with you guys again shortly.
Thanks again, Sean.